So I guess we can go ahead and proceed on to adding our tanks to our load case. From the last session, I think we did a balance in there, and we checked the water plane location, and you could see it was still floating extremely light, but we've only got the self-weight, the engines, and those two cargo areas defined. So if we come back into our still water load condition here, we go onto the mass tab, and we can add all of our tanks at once using the add all option. And it basically will grab everything that is under this volume folder in the group tree and add it here. And in that loading document, you can see this is how we're going to set the loading for these tanks. And for almost all of them, well, for all the tanks, we'll use a 98% permeability. We can set the density of the contents of each tank individually. So most of these are 950. We have one at 1,000 and one at the density of seawater here, the 1025.9. And then these are loaded by percentage full. So they're all, except for two, set to 98% full. So if we come back into Maestro here, those are the values that we'll be putting in. Other options that we have when we define these tanks are whether or not the tank is intact or flooded. And you can change that. You can toggle it between intact and flooded just by double clicking on there. When the tank is intact, it's exactly as you'd expect, holding the contents of whatever fluid. When you flood a tank, it will flood to the equilibrium condition of the water outside the hull. So if the tank is fully submerged, it'll be completely full when it's flooded. If it's completely above the water, it'll be empty. If it's partially submerged, it'll be at the contents will be at the same level as the exterior water surface. There's also, I guess, and I know this is in the help with regard to the density. I think it uses the heavier of the two fluids, whether it's if the contents of the tank are heavier, it will use that density. If the density of the seawater is heavier, it'll use seawater instead. The other option here by type is we can load the tanks in several different ways. Now the value that we put in here, that's going to be 98% for percent full, it's just listed as a value because it can also represent the mass. And if we double click to cycle through each one of these, we can load it by head, as a fraction or percentage full, or dry mass. Now, dry mass allows you to take a volume tank, but fill it with sort of a dry medium. Now, it will still have pressure on the exterior walls, but the difference between the dry mass and the liquid loading is whether or not there's a free surface effect there. If it's dry, you don't get the shifting that you do with the fluid. And we can set all of those at once by selecting, you just hold the shift key down and select the full group here, or from first to last group. And when you right click, then you can select how you want it loaded. And some of these are just to view features, but we're going to load by fraction, so liquid fraction. So we could also do by liquid mass, by head. I'm actually not sure what that one is. I'll have to look up what the static is. It's not one that we use commonly, or at least not one that I've used commonly, so I'm not certain on that one. But typically we do either by mass or by fraction. And since most of our loading is done off of a weight report, and quite often it's done by what the actual mass of the tank is. And since we're loading by percent full, I need to clear that static. I'm having difficulty. I'm not sure how to, I would have thought clicking that would have cleared it, but it doesn't. It's not something I use often, so I'm just going to start over. Grab all of these, and we're going to load by liquid fraction. Now for actually entering the data, and we'll put in 0.98 here. And you can use the arrow keys to navigate around if you want. You can also cut and paste in here. So if we hit Control C, it's not quite like a spreadsheet where if you highlighted several cells and then hit paste, it doesn't fill all of them, it only fills the first one. But you can select multiple cells and copy them, make this a little quicker. Likewise, you could copy them across. If we know this is going to be 0.98, 950, we grab all three, start pasting them down, things up a little. The other thing is, and most of these grid-based dialogues in Maestro will allow you to cut and paste in and out of the Maestro program. So you can have a copy of Excel open and you have a spreadsheet with all of your tank definitions in there and what your loading is going to be. You can come in to Excel and paste them in here. You can make changes or whatever, and then simply grab them and put them back. I think the third one down is going to be 1,000, and eventually that one we wanted to 5.9. This one will be 0, and that one will be 0. And when we come back into Maestro, you can see I made these tanks in order from bow to stern, but I forgot one. And I made the 4S low wing tank last. So its ID number was 16. Now, when we look at it in the volume groups tree over here, they're all listed, sorted alphabetically. So that last tank is where you'd expect it in the list, up with the other fours. It's not here. But as with most of these dialogues, you can sort by any column. So we'll just sort by name, and now it's in the position where we expect it. And so this can come in handy when you go to match up your spreadsheet data with your tank loads and stuff and your model. So we'll come back in the spreadsheet here, and we'll grab all of these values, copy them, and we can paste them back in here. And I was off by 1. That 0 is supposed to be on the low wing tank. If we look at our loading here, the 1000 density is for the 3S high wing, so we got that one correct. The 4S low wing is the one that should be 1025.9 with 0% full. So we'll change that other one back. And again, we can cut and paste that in. And the only other one that's different is that 0 down for tank number 8, which we have. And there's 2 more columns here, pipe head and deballast pressure. And you can find information on these in the help file as well. But pipe head basically is if your tank is completely full, you can add additional head onto it. Basically, if the vent pipe was full as well, it will take whatever that extra head that you have above the tank for that, basically the contents of the vent pipe, and it'll apply that as an additional amount of pressure throughout the tank. The other is the deballast pressure. So if you had a partially full tank, it will apply that pressure to all surfaces of the tank as if you were pressurizing it. And once we have these full, or once we have these set how we want them, we'll hit the Modify tab to enter that data. Now, if we, and we'll do a little demo of this in a second, but you need to remember to hit that Modify tab before you leave the dialog, because that's what commits the changes. You can also hit this total mass button if you want to see what your total tank loading is. So this is the total mass from all of the tanks in this load condition. Now, for some of the other things, when you right click on a tank, if you say view, it's just bringing up a view of that one particular tank, similar to setting your view part in the groups tree here. And volume gives you some, well, that one isn't full. Let me pick one with something that's actually in the tank. So it gives you some specifics about how that tank is loaded, the volume capacity of the tank, the mass of the tank, what the centroid of the contents is, the fraction is, the percent full, and then I guess that's the overall height of the tank, permeability, and the density of the contents. Now you can see the height is slightly above 5 meters, even though this tank is only 5 meters tall. And I think that's because there is a little bit of trim in the model. So I think that height is the overall extent, the vertical extent of the tank. The other thing with regard to that information is if you come over into the volume groups here in the groups tree, if you right click over here, you can bring up this entry, volume. I'm sorry, that's just for the one tank. I guess we do it. Yeah, if we click on the folder at the top where it says volume, you can get volume table. And this is rather nice for when you're doing reports and such. You get the name, whether or not it's a centerline tank, capacity, what the actual filled volume is, or volume of the fluid, percent filled, density, and so forth. And this can all be copied into Excel. And you can actually, if you want to get these titles in here, like if you hit Control A and grab everything, and we Control C, come over to Excel and copy it, all we get is the data. And this works on several of the dialogues where if you right click up in this area on the titles, you can say change the fixed rows. And if I change my fixed rows to 0, you can see they're no longer grayed out at the top. And if I hit Control A and grab everything, now it grabs the titles as well. And I can copy them, come into Excel, and if I paste them, you get the titles at the top of the column. And I think it reverts back automatically once you exit the dialog. Yeah, now if you open it again, it goes back to regular. The other thing that is a handy feature in here is the check overfill. Now, I think it will tell you if you have an overfilled tank when you go to run anyway, but since we're loading by percentage full, we can't overfill the tank. But if we take one of these and we switch it to by mass, and this is something you need to be careful of, because if you entered all of your data in here, but you had the type set differently, you can get very different results. Like when we look at the volume table here, we've got 17,000 kilograms in that tank because it's loaded by fraction. If we have to close that, if we change that and do by mass, now we're looking at 0.98 kilograms. And when we bring up our volume table, you can see it's still doing percent full because I didn't hit modify. You need to modify in order to commit it. Now it'll compute what the new percent filled is based on how it was loaded. And actually it has slightly more weight than I guess what it should have. But at any rate, that was just something to be careful of. And if we set this by liquid, and let's make this 20,000. And it'll mention that it's overfilled. Now you can manually run that check by hitting this button. And if we ask it to correct, it'll switch the liquid fraction 100% full. So move that back to 0.98 where it should be. That should be most of what you need for the tanks. Make sure we hit modify, and we can close those.